centipedes, and earthworms in your pile will thrive and work faster if they have access to oxygen. When a compost pile compacts and shrinks, as they all do, air passages disappear. When you fluff up the material in the pile, air passages are recreated, and the organisms living and working there can pull in the oxygen they need. This is why some people turn their compost piles. Really, they are fluffing them up so that the critters inside can pull in the oxygen they need. The critters have access to oxygen, so they can live and reproduce and digest in greater numbers and with more vigor. The Over-Easy composter design allows for easy access to your material for fluffing it up. You just unbuckle the 2 quick-release fasteners, peel the unit away, and reassemble it to the side. It takes about 15 minutes to turn the material back into the empty composter. If you do this once a week, you'll have finished compost not in 1 to 2 years, but rather in about 6 or 8 weeks. Now, as you turn your pile to fluff up the material, you should also observe carefully how the compost looks and feels. This would be the perfect time to add water, brown materials, or green, depending on how the composting process is going. Whenever you're turning your compost pile, take a moment to do the squeeze test. Determine if the pile is wet enough. If you can't squeeze out a few drops of water, the pile is too dry. You should get out the hose and wet everything down as you go along. If the compost is wet enough, but seems to be just sitting there and not breaking down at all, you should add more green, nitrogen-rich material to the pile. Chopped up garden weeds would be good, kitchen scraps, coffee grounds, grass clippings, or even lakeweed would all be good choices for green material at this point. If the pile is slimy and smelly, or not turning into crumbly brown compost, then you should add some brown material as you are turning the pile. Mix in a good amount of leaves, hay, or dried grass to provide the brown, carbon-rich material that your compost pile needs in this situation. Remember, if the pile is too dry, add water. If nothing's happening, add some green material. And if the pile is smelly and slimy, add brown.
Wait a minute. This sounds way too complicated. Can't I just throw the browns and greens in a pile and let them do their thing?
Yes, you can. Rain will fall on the pile, and over time, the microorganisms will break down the bottom layer of greens and browns into compost. You can just keep adding greens and browns and some soil onto the top. After a year or two, if you'd like some compost, just lift off the top layers until you find some soft, crumbly compost underneath. This happens all the time in the natural world. You'll know that your compost is done when it is brown, crumbly, and looks like soil. You won't be able to see many remnants of the original material that you put into the pile. It will have a pleasant smell, earthy and rich. At this point, you can put the compost directly onto your garden, or you could rub it through a screen to take out any extra sticks or bigger pieces of compost that aren't fully decomposed. Welded wire with 1/4 inch squares works well for screening. Any leftover chunks should be tossed back into the pile to continue breaking down. There are many important uses for compost in your garden. Fall and spring are perfect times for adding compost to the soil. It's recommended to add 1 to 3 inches of compost to all the growing areas of your garden every year. When you transplant seedlings in the spring, first add a little compost to the hole where they'll be planted. You can also add compost around flowering and fruiting plants in the summer. When they are at the height of flowering or when they are bearing fruits and vegetables, gently work in a little compost around the base of the plant. And finally, A surefire way to give your plant-loving neighbors a treat is to share a little compost. Now that you know how to make it in bigger quantities and on a regular basis, you'll probably have some to share.
Is there anything else I can do that will speed up the process?
Glad you asked. As a matter of fact, if you shred or cut up the material you're adding to the pile into smaller pieces, it will speed things up. The smaller pieces offer the microorganisms more surfaces to eat and work on, so they reproduce faster, so they eat more, so they reproduce faster, etc., etc. Even without cutting things up, the basics will take you far. Remember, layer brown and green material in a large capacity composter. Add some soil or finished compost from time to time. Add water until you can squeeze a few drops out of the material. And if you want to help the microorganisms out and speed up the process, you can fluff up the material every now and then to create some air passages. The results of your efforts will be rich, dark brown compost that adds humus to your soil. Humus is a champion at holding water. It lightens the soil, allowing oxygen in. It provides minerals and some nitrogen to your plants. A garden amended with 1 to 3 inches of humus every year grows stronger, healthier, and more productive plants. The natural world is constantly returning organic matter to the soil, and so can we. We can do it in our big gardens or our little backyards, in the country or in the city. Come on, everybody, let's get composting.